Apoyo moral.
We're going to
Apoyo
get
moral.
started. Hello, welcome to the School of Architecture. My name is Juan Miro. I'm the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs here at the school. Happy to see all of you here. We have a great speaker and a great occasion today also because we are opening an exhibit that goes along with the lecture today. But before we go into the presentation, introductions of the speaker today, I wanted to I wanted to use this as an opportunity to welcome to our school Consul Carlos González Gutiérrez, and I wanted to also thank him for the support that he has provided to make this exhibition possible. Since we always have had good relationship with the Consulate of Mexico, but since Consul González Gutiérrez came to Austin, he has demonstrated a great commitment to work with UT. I seem to see him at many events related to UT and many activities promoting a scholarship for students, and he was very, very quick in helping us to bring this exhibition here. And we're very thankful for that. And if you can please welcome him here to speak. He's going to say a few words before we introduce the speaker.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias, Juan. Thank you very much, Juan and Benjamin Ibarra, for extending to the Mexican Consulate the invitation to participate tonight. For both my wife, Alina, who's joining me tonight, and myself, it's a pleasure to receive Juan Ignacio del Cueto Ruiz Funes, Arquitecto, bienvenido.
Thank you.
And to participate in the inaugural ceremony of Architect Candela's work. For someone that comes from Mexico City, like we do, who every Sunday used to go to the Mercado de Coyoacán, which is, as well as the Mercado de Jamaica every now and then, and who often had to go to the Palacio de los Deportes, Architect Candela's imagination is something very concrete, very specific, that marked literally part of our lives. So I think that Felix Candela has found a very fruitful home here. This Spanish and Mexican architect that blossomed in my little town, Mexico City. I'm so glad that the School of Architecture, that for more than 2 decades has been organizing exchanges with architecture schools in Mexico, is now we are able to host Felix Candela work within its walls. I want to thank the Foreign Ministry, and in particular the Direction General for Cultural Affairs, for sponsoring and helping with the bringing Felix Candela work from Mexico and San Antonio to here. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Benjamin Ibarra, who's going to be the one in charge of introducing our speaker.
Good evening. Well, it's so nice to see full house tonight, especially being Halloween night. So nice outside. I hope it's yourself and not the mask of yourself or the costume. It's actually you. So thank you very much for being here. I just want to remind you before we get started that immediately after the presentation, the lecture, there is an exhibition opening that will take place immediately after. There will be some refreshments, and of course the wonderful work that is on the walls in the main gallery. So Juan Ignacio del Cueto is also known as Dino del Cueto. It's Dino for friends, and I think for everyone. Dino is a very good, well-known scholar in Mexico City and in the entire country in Mexico. his work is really, really impressive. He has been developing research for a number of years. Has written several books on the work of Candela that you will see tonight. A book that was recently published on the Spanish architects who migrated to Mexico during the Civil War in Spain in the mid-20th century, and a number of articles, a number of presentations that he has been giving all over the world, universities in Latin America, Europe, and of course in the United States. He's also the coordinator of the Center for Research in Architecture, Landscape, and Urbanism, Landscape Architecture and Urbanism at UNAM, which is pretty much the center where all the research happens in terms of the design disciplines in the UNAM in Mexico, right there at the core of the university city. And he has also been working as a professor, right? So he's a full professor at UNAM, and all the students really want to take his classes when he teaches because they are really, really full of content and they learn a lot. He also teaches a studio as well, so he's a very complete scholar, and we are really happy to have him here this evening with this wonderful lecture that he's about to present, and also the wonderful exhibition that you see downstairs that is actually just a little part of a larger exhibition that he created. This traveling exhibition that we see today is just a portion of it. So with further ado, I would like you to help me to welcome Professor Del Cueto. Thank you.
Gracias. Let me. Okay. Do you hear me? Really? I don't hear me? Okay. Thank you very much for being here today. I am very glad to return to this school. I was here 6 years ago talking about Candela, and only 6 months ago in a Benjamin Congress about the construction history. And I like a lot to talk about Candela, but not to talk in English because I have problems. Then I start reading, and maybe I feel better. And I apologize because my English is sometimes too short. Candela say that I am neither an architect nor an engineer. I am a builder. Felix Candela, builder of concrete shells, is the name of this lecture. Mexican architecture surprised the world in the decade of 1950s with incredible light roofs made of reinforced concrete, of admirable aesthetic quality, built by Felix Candela. This talk describes how Candela was able to build these inspired structures thanks to his talent, and as a structural designer, but also because of the Mexican context into which he landed, including the architects with which he collaborated and the skilled yet inexpensive workmanship that he found in his adopted country. In other countries with stricter regulations, Candela would not have had the creative freedom to explore and archive the extraordinary constructive experiments that gave him international prestige. I'm sure all of you know this picture. The Picasso's Guernica represents the drama which Spain lived between 1936 and 1939 during the Spanish Civil War. This is a very well-known masterpiece, but only a few know that the painting was commissioned to Pablo Picasso for the Spanish Pavilion in the Paris 1937 World Fair. The Pavilion is one of the best examples of Spanish modern architecture and the first work made by Spanish architects in exile. However, it is also the last modern art building in Spain for a long period of time. The most progressive architects in Spain from that era were exiled. These are almost 50 Spanish exiled architects. 3 of them live a long time in the United States. José Luis Sert, or Joseph Luis Sert, who was chairman in the School of Design of Harvard University, Esteban Martín de la Mora, and Felix Candela, who lived here since 1971 after spending his glorious days in Mexico until his death in 1997. These are the 24 architects who arrived in Mexico. One of the youngest was Felix Candela. Felix Candela Uteriño lives 3 lives. I mean, his life was of almost 88 years can divide in 3 periods of equal duration. First life in Spain, formative years between 1910 and 1939. His birth and education took place in Spain. Was born in Madrid on January 27, 1910, and studied in the School of Architecture in the same city from 1929 to 1935. At the start of the Spanish Civil War in 1936, he volunteered to fight on the side of the legitimate government, the Republican Army. Upon Franco's victory, he crossed the Pyrenees with the defeated Republican Army and was interned in a French concentration camp, Saint-Cyprien. His second life, his professional development and the height of his career occurred in Mexico between 1939 and 1971. The Mexican government offered asylum and transportation in 1939 for a lot of exiled Spanish Republicans. In 1941, he became a Mexican citizen. He married with his Spanish girlfriend, Eladia, and had 4 daughters in Mexico. In 1950, he established his own construction company, Cubierta Sala, for building the thin concrete structure, better known as shells, and became a famous architect in all the world. And his third life took place in the United States, where he lived his professional sunset between 1971 and 1997. He moved to Chicago in 1971 to teach in the University of Illinois. In 1978, moved to New York and later to Raleigh, North Carolina. Since 1976, after Francisco Franco died, he returns frequently to Spain, but continued resident in Raleigh, where he died on December 7th, 1997. This is Lázaro Cárdenas, president in Mexico between 1934 and 1940, who received almost 20,000 exiled Spanish Republicans. This is Felix Candela passport given in Paris, 18 May 1939, and this is the Carta de Naturalización. He was 14 January 1941. he became a Mexican citizen. This is the city that found that exiled architects, no, arrived in Mexico City. In a Mexico City with 1.5 million inhabitants, with a very good modern architecture. José Villagrán, Juan O'Gorman, Juan Segura, Francisco Serrano built a very impressive, good architecture in the last 30s and the 40s. And those are some of the projects which Candela made in his first 10 years in Mexico. If Candela had continued doing this kind of buildings, we wouldn't be speaking now about him. What is it that he made which brings us to talk about him nowadays? This is what this is what was on Candela's mind when he arrived in Mexico. The state-of-the-art technology in construction happening in Europe in between the First and the Second World War. Laminar structures of reinforced concrete, best known as shells. Eugene Freycinet in France, Franz Dischinger and Ulrich Finsterwalder in Germany, Eduardo Torroja in Spain, and Robert Maillard in Switzerland. 10 years after his arrival, he was able to build his first experimental shell structure, a Quaternarian vault, built in 1949. In 1950, 10 years after his arrival in Mexico, Candela founded Cubierta Ala, a construction company with a name that evokes lightness and flight. Ala means wing in Spanish. Cubiertas Ala, wing covers, with his partners was two brothers, Mexican architects, Fernando and Raúl Fernández Rangel, and with his two siblings, Antonio y Julia Candela. This is in 1950, and this is in 1968 when Candela, with Enrique Castañeda and Antonio Peyri, developed the project of the Sport Palace. This drawing, which is kept in the Avery Library at Columbia University, shows the 25 favorite works of Candela in Mexico City among 200 built works built in Mexico City. With these beautiful sketches, we will see some of them. From his company, Candela building the concrete shells that made him international famous during the 1950s and 60s. His work revolutionized architecture using a European technology that flourished in Mexico's soil, where it reached extraordinary quality and dimensions. He was neither the only one nor the first to build this type of structures, yet he opened new paths in the discipline through the use of hyperbolic paraboloid, taking full advantage of his expressive and structural possibilities. And here we can see a sampler of his works from the first commissioned projects, Boliches Marsella in 1950, to Palacio de los Deportes, Sport Palace, in 1968. Among these, there are industrial buildings which constitute most of his work, about 90%, gas station, institutional, and religious buildings. From his company, Candela building the concrete shells that made international I wrote this. One of the many structures built by Candela whose resistance depends on shape, the majority relied on geometric of the hyperbolic paraboloid or hyper. This geometric form is an anticlastic double inverse curvature whose meanings that both of curvatures have opposite concavities, 1 and 2, is a real surface built by straight lines, and this facilitates the construction of a scaffolding made of straight wooden staves that generate the wrapped surface. The main characteristic of these shapes is that they transmit almost exclusively compression stresses, allowing for the construction of very thin plates of constant thickness, generally around 4 centimeters, less than 2 inches. One of the first clients of Cubierta Sala was the architect Jorge González Reina, who in 1951 charged with designing a building for the Institute of Nuclear Physics in the new University City of Mexico. This is the Ciudad Universitaria in construction, University City, and was confronted with an apparently unsolvable problem. The cover for this little building could not be more than 15 millimeters thick. This is a half of an inch. Candela provided a solution taking advantage of situation to use for the first time the hyperbolic paraboloid shape that he knew in a book that the French engineer Fernando published in 1936. Roof was formed with 2 saddle hypers and thus create the small pavilion ray cosmic ray pavilions. This is not how an hyper could by a horizontal plane and 2 vertical planes made the saddle, no, the saddle hyper. Through the construction, Candela literally experimented and solved problems on the way. Once the geometry of the shell had been determined and its structural calculation complete, the building process required the participation of a veritable army of collaborators, such skilled carpenters to build the scaffolding, and a lot of masons to lay down the structural steel, the pouring of the concrete, taking down the scaffolding, and finish the details. This is an announcement who Candela published in a review in September 1952 about the Pavilion Rayos Cósmicos en la Ciudad Universitaria, Cosmic Ray Pavilions in University City, covered with a shell of concrete, a half of an inch thickness. Cubierta Sala developed an impressive number of built works in their approximately 20 years of existence that can divide in 2 big families. Straight edge and curved edge shells. They did so by following 3 precepts considered essential by Candela: common sense, efficiency, and economy. Economy of means. Through his company, Candela established professional contact with the most significant members of the architectural landscape of Mexico at the time. Among the colleagues that solicited his collaboration were architects of great renown, like you see in that list. Mario Pani, Juan Sordo Madaleno, Enrique Yáñez, Pedro Ramírez Vázquez, Enrique de la Mora, etc. In the catalog of projects and build works of Cubierta Sala, there is a list of more than 1,400 commissions, of which close to 800 were built. In this professional collaboration, Candela's role consisted in solving the structural design of the roofs, reviewing the proposals presented generally as mere sketches in order to give them geometric definition, systematize them, turn them into blueprints, make the necessary calculations, and convert them into build works. In 1959, he described the process as follows. I spend most of my time telling people that I cannot do the things they ask me to do, or that I cannot do them the way they want them. The main work I do consists in simplifying and regularizing the sketches I am presented with, and in convincing the clients that success does not consist in building extravagant forms, but in archiving simple forms, developing the details with affection. The type of roof most requested of the company was the umbrella, an element that was both inexpensive and versatile, shaped by 4 segments of high bars supported by a central column which transmits all loads to the earth. This is the 4 section of high bar, and by a column transmits all loads to the earth. By repeating in series this module with a straight edge shell, which could be used to cover up to 200 square meters per unit, many hundred of industrial and service structures were built throughout Mexico: factories, warehouses, gas stations, markets, and bus stations, like this one gas station. Shell structure reached the height of expressivity when covering religious spaces. The first temple Candela built was the Virgen de la Medalla Milagrosa, Virgin of Miracles Medal Church, between 1953 and 54, about which he wrote, this. The material of our time is reinforced concrete, and I have tried to build with this material a church with a traditional character in which both the structural function and the internal expression depend completely on its form. As this church was under construction, he began what would become the most fruitful collaboration of his career with the architects Enrique de la Mora and Fernando Lopez Carmona. This collaboration started in 1953 with the project of the roof of the training floor of the Mexican Stock Exchange, Bolsa Mexicana de Valores, in the historic center of Mexico City, that represent the first Granite Vault built with high bars in the world. A veritable Mexican apportation to the history of the construction. The rich collaboration was followed by other works, overall temples like El Altillo in Coyoacán, San Antonio de las Huertas in Calzada, Mexico, Tacuba in Mexico City, San José Obrero in Monterrey, and San Vicente de Paul in Coyoacán too. It was the time that Candela began to teach in the Escuela Nacional de Arquitectura de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. This is Candela teaching in my school. Let's see some straight shells that we see. This is El Altillo Chapel, a beautiful chapel covered with only one high part of straight edge with the, how do you say, de la huella? The print or the footprint of the formwork. It's very important. This is in Monterrey, San Jose Obrero, and this is in Coyoacán too, San Vicente de Paul, inspired in the hat of the nuns. And this is Candela with Enrique de la Mora, el pelón de la Mora in Spanish. El pelón, how do you say el pelón in? ¿Cómo? Bald. Okay. Let's see some curved edge shells. This is a beautiful chapel in Cuernavaca, Palmira Chapel. This can we see the formwork? No, incredible. All are straight lines, no, who move in the space to make the double curvature. And this is finished. It's beautiful because the aprovecha, no, the land and to give the bench, de las bancas. No? In 1961, Candela received the Auguste Perret Prize. The International Union of Architects gave this prize in London in 1961. Returned to see this incredible roof, no? Who came the idea of the Granite Vault invented by the Romans 2,000 years ago, but the first time who built with a Granite Vault made by Hypers. This is the same idea, the saddle Hyper, who intersect with another one and made this beautiful shape. This is the construction and the finished work. Then Candela and Enrique de la Mora y Lopez Carmona used this kind of roof in another works. This is San Antonio de las Huertas church. It's a beautiful church made by 3 granite vaults. This is a beautiful mural where Elvira Gascon and Exiled painted too, Spanish Exiled painted, made the portrait of Enrique de la Mora, architect, el pelón de la Mora. It's a beautiful interior, but maybe it's the ugliest church in the world by the exterior. No, it's never ending the idea of Enrique de la Mora. And we will go to the south of of Mexico City to see maybe the most famous shell of Candela, the Los Manantiales restaurant in Xochimilco, a beautiful place of canals, no, and lake that forms this kind of flower, 8 petals flower, made by 2 squares, rotate 45 degrees. In the intersection are the supports, and it's made by 4 cañones, no? 4 saddle. This is 4 saddle intersection, and made this kind of flower that floats in the Xochimilco lake. It's a beautiful and a very inspired form Like we see, most of concrete shells made by Candela based on the geometry of the high par, which represent a high mark in Mexican architecture. Them could be built thanks to its structural logic, to the control of geometry, and to the building abilities of Felix Candela and a few other colleagues. The construction process was almost artisanal. As illustration, we will take the construction of the restaurant Los Manantiales Xochimilco, a process that was admirably recorded in a series of photographs by Juan Guzman, the pseudonym of the German photographer Hans Gutmann, who had fought in the Spanish Civil War and international brigadier and arrived in Mexico with all the Spanish exiles. The images allow us to understand the construction process. Once the geometry of the shell was defined, the key was the complicated construction of the scaffolding. Made up of staves, long and narrow pieces of wood that formed the ruled surfaces of inverse double curvature that would give shape to the cover. The rest was easy as a pie. Skilled masons would lay down the network of thin metal rods over which the concrete was poured. The pouring of the concrete through the method called boteado, with boats, in which boats of mixture are carried on the shoulders of a veritable army of workmen, and powered by them one by one onto the metal reticule. Once the mixture was set and the scaffolding taken apart, the shell took on its permanent form. This is the moment of the scaffolding taken apart. The flower of 8 petals in Xochimilco took 16 weeks to build. A brief calculation tells us that each petal had approximately a surface of 275 square meters, made with approximately 13.5 cubic meters of concrete. Each segment of the shell would use about 30 tons of concrete. If each mason can transport 20 kilos of mixture per trip in his pail, 1,500 pails would be required in order to complete each of the petals. Therefore, this roof has a total of 2,200 square meters of covered surface and requires more than 240 tons of concrete. Thus, the work of pouring the concrete required no less than 12,000 trips of workers loaded with a pail of mixture. This is a recent Friday, 8th of January 2016. In the Guardian, this diary published the best of all the things, no? And in January published the best concrete buildings. And published this in the first place, took the Pantheon of Rome. Second place, Unité de Habitación de Marsella de Le Corbusier. And in the third place, Los Manantiales Restaurant, Mexico City, Felix Candela. I think it's better than the Unité de Habitación because the Unité de Habitación is only, no, marcos rígidos, no, doesn't have any. And there is the others, no, in Buenos Aires, in Paris, in Sao Paulo, in Lisboa, in Germany, in Minnesota, and in Chile. And now go to the north of the Mexico City to see a sampler of the cubiertas ala made. And the only building that Mies van der Rohe built in all Latin America, the Bacardi building, the Bacardi headquarters. This is cylindric vaults, umbrellas in parkings, in the storage, no? Umbrellas to make a shadow to the 4,000 barrels of rum, no? With this idea, very interesting, no? Between support and support, usually there are 15 meters, but with this strategic form, no, Candela had 25 meters between supports. And the plant embotellador, the bottling plant, no, the first etapa, the first state, with three big Granite Vaults, 30 meters from support to support, 30 meters for 90 meters to 2,700 meters of square meter in the first stage, and in the second, only espejaron, make a mirror, no, and made 60 by 90 meters, 5,400 square meters to make this beautiful inner space. No, it's maybe one of the most impressive buildings in 20th century, and it's near from Mies van der Rohe headquarters for Bacardi, and this is the comparison between the idea of the resistance by mass, sí, por masa se dice by mass, and resistance for by form, no, if you cut the potatoes in one form or in another, no? These potatoes, from this potato we have the three of these, no? It's better to. And the last work of Candela in Mexico City was the Sport Palace to the Olympic Games 1968. This is the idea, no? Spheric shape, no? 5 meters, maybe about 16 feet, no? This is the scale, human scale, no? And between each of these, there are 4 hyper forms made by an aluminum substructure. And here, well, in Dallas, Candela works with O'Neill Ford and other Texan architects, no? Here in this school, have the O'Neill Ford archive, and there are the plans of this Great Southern Corporation and the Texas Instrument Factory. And this is the first conference that Candela gave in his out of Mexico, was here in Austin. Mi primera salida a Estados Unidos fue a la Universidad de Texas en Austin, con motivo de esta experiencia, los días 21 y 22 de 1952, marzo 21 y 22 de 1952. That's the first time that Candela go out Mexico and give his conference here. There are some of the works of the, we said the wake of Candela, la estela de Candela, no? Some followers in Mexico, like Juan Antonio Tonda and Alberto González Pozo. In the north of Mexico, in Monterrey and in the industrial part of Mexico City. In England, there is a market in England, Huddersfield. In Norway, no, in Tromsø, there was a cinema that converted in a library, in a public library, some years ago. This is a Manantiales, no, clone in the frontier of Ecuador and Colombia. This is the Amazonas River. In Germany, in the East Germany, there were Ulrich Muther, an engineer who built shapes or shells inspired in Candela. And this is the posthum work of Candela in Valencia, in the Oceanographic Park in Valencia. He made an imitation of the Manantiales with a little changes, but he died in 1997 when was 1 year working in the project, and this opened in 2002. Near of the famous work of Santiago Calatrava, de la ciudad de las ciencias y las artes, Science and Arts City in Valencia. It's near to the last work of Candela. This is Santiago Calatrava with Felix Candela when Juan Miró know both of them in Madrid. And this is the philosophy of Candela and the philosophy of another genius, Santiago Calatrava. What I like to compare these philosophies with these images. Candela, the athlete who no, like Usain Bolt, no le sobra nada, o sea, no, the most efficient, and Calatrava maybe like Schwarzenegger, no, with muscles all around. Well, and this is las felicitaciones de Navidad, no, the Christmas cards, Cubierta Sala sends for his clients, no. Santa Claus approached the form of the paraboloid or landing, no, or trying to find the chimenea. How do you say that? And this is Candela when I met him in 1992. It's an incredible work. We made in 2010 an exhibition, a big exhibition to celebrate the centennial of the birth of Candela. The first place we showed was in Valencia, and we made these models with my team of becarios in the UNAM, no? We made this rompecabezas, how do you say? Cool. And we made these models that we will see here in Meban Gallery. No, this is, oops. This is all our students working in the models. This is Juan Antonio Tonda, died 6 months ago, and Juan Gerardo Oliva. This is when we shipped to Valencia, because we made it in UNAM in Mexico, arrived in Valencia in the IVAM, Instituto Valenciano de Arte Moderno, and show with a lot of original, I don't know, cuadernos, no? Sketchbooks of Candela. When this is in Princeton, those plans are in Columbia University. This is Fernando Lopez Carmona. Then arrived to Mexico, a modern art museum in Chapultepec. It was a big opening, no, with 1,200 assistants, and then went to Columbia University, Wallachar Gallery, and then we returned all the originals and made an itinerary exhibition who were in various places in Mexico, in Morelia, in Guadalajara, and then go out Mexico, first in Guatemala, Embassy of Mexico in Guatemala, from Teodoro González de León, recently died, and came to the United States, the first in Art Museum of the Americas in Washington, D.C., then in New York, then in San Antonio, Mexican Cultural Institute, and today is here down the stairs. No? Thank you very much.
So we have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. Did Candela ever consider obviously the ease to climb up these structures because of how they touch the ground? The workers, you said they did like 12,000 trips. But I remember I got to visit the restaurant in Xochimilco, and you can't. They put like things, kind of like police things at the corners that aren't in the photos, of course. But what, like, did Candela express a kind of desire about climbing or not climbing on top of the structure?
¿Cuál sería la?
Que si Candela quería o se le ocurría que la gente pudiera subir a las estructuras.
I think Candela doesn't want to the people climb the structures, but when you went to Los Manantiales, the first thing you want is to climb, no? Yes, but it's a little dangerous, no? Because there are a topographic, no? Very. I don't think so. No.
I recognize many buildings that are still functional in Mexico City. The gas stations,
Yes.
all the churches are, I guess they are still used and people attend. I wonder what happened with all the other buildings. For example, Palacio de los Deportes, is it still used?
Yes.
Or the Bacardi plant, or what happens with in terms of its functionality after so many years?
Bacardi plants is in use, and Bacardi really cares and are very proud of his two master works, no, the Miss Van der Rohe and the Candela. The churches are very in good state, because no, the people use every Sunday, and there are some lost buildings, no, like mercados, markets, like Jamaica Market was the umbrella was demolished. Some markets in Chiapas and in other places are demolished to build modern markets, no? And there are terrible things. It's very important to make this kind of work to sensibilize the people that we have a very impressive heritage in Mexico of this kind of build, no? Made in the middle of the 20th century, and it's necessary to preserve, no? And to feel proud of this kind of. Mexico was como una punta de lo, o sea, fue avant-garde in that moment, no? In the architecture of the world. Candela was the Mexican architect, and I said Mexican because he nationalized, no? The most published in the world in the 50s and the 60s, and then apareció, no? Appear the Barragán, no? Work and so, and Candela was forgotten, no? And it's very important to recuperate that figure, no? That and his work.
One more question, yes.
So you mentioned that Candela had partners. So when he passed away, did they keep like building, designing these kind of shapes, or when he passed away, it was like they didn't design anymore?
Es que Candela tenía socios, que
Sí.
ellos continuaron con la firma.
No, when Candela came to the United States, his brother Antonio still with the firm 5 or 6 years more, and then the work in some moment in the 60s were a lot. In the first 60s, the firm has a lot of work, but in the second half of the 60s, the work was go down, and he doesn't have more work, and he accept to came to Chicago as a full professor in University of Illinois, and then moved to New York, and then moved to Raleigh in North Carolina, and died there. No?
It was more like a trend, like it was like a movement then for like a period of time, right?
Right. It was 50s, all the 50s and the half the 60s until 67, 68, and then there was a reason. In 64, there was a president, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, que estableció un salario mínimo. A minimum wage to the workers, and los presupuestos ya no eran. There was no competitive anymore. Candela told me, because I made an interview with Candela and talked a lot, and he told me that he has a lot of work, but made beautiful shells, because it was the cheapest way to cover big space. Was for the cheapest, not for the beautiful, no. And when lived this kind of
when the minimum wage they were not competitive anymore.
There was not competitive anymore. That kind of structures, no. We said that it's important to recuperar to recoup the idea of the estructura resistente por forma, no? The structure resistant by form, not by mass, no? This is the idea.
Well, I think it's time for us to go down and see the exhibition. What do you think? Please, a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you very much.